Oh, I can't wait to replay Dark Souls 2. Yay. Dark Souls 2 and I have a very troubled past. I've only ever played the game completely through once, and every other time I've tried to play through the game again, it usually ends in tears around the Shrine of Amana area. The last time I tried to play through Dark Souls 2 a couple of months ago, it was just the absolute breaking point for me, and it did not end well for Dark Souls 2. Over the weekend I noticed that Dark Souls 2 was for sale on the European PlayStation Store, so I figured now that I am taking my Dark Souls videos on YouTube more seriously and I have a bit of growth, that it makes sense that I have at least one working copy of the game. So I picked it up again. I decided to give it one last blast. I streamed the game from start to finish this weekend, and after completing it I have the exact same opinion that I always had, that Dark Souls 2 is a really good game, but it's the weakest of the Souls series. I ran into a lot of the same problems and frustrations that I've always had, and I just want to talk about some of the things that I like about this game and some of the things that it just did wrong. Now this video is not going to be me just shitting all over Dark Souls 2, it's going to be very fair. There are some good and negative points to this game, and also if you are a shield user in Dark Souls 2, you are very welcome. This video is shield user friendly. Shields are viable in this game, would you believe it? For the sake of context and clarity, I am relatively new to the Souls series, but I played the trilogy in chronological order, with only a couple of days in between each game. I wasn't involved in the community whatsoever, and I went into each game completely blind. I had no idea that there was an A-team, B-team mentality going on, so my opinions of each game has not been skewed by anybody. I built my own opinions of playing these games by myself. Now before going any deeper, back then I had a lot of negative opinions about Dark Souls 2. Things such as lackluster boss fights, environments and areas that just lacked details that the other games have, bad enemy placement, and sometimes just way too many enemies in one area, which just added to this whole fake sense of difficulty that Dark Souls 2 went for. And even though I can handle myself against crowds of enemies, it's just a slow and tedious process to do it. Even more so tedious when there is a lot of crowd control to be done on the run to a boss's fog wall, and I have to choose between staying and killing all of these guys and wasting a lot of time, or sometimes dying every time I try to make a run right to the fog wall. Paired with the fact that in this game it takes a while to actually enter the fog wall, and for those first few seconds you have no invincibility frames. Enemies can stagger and attack you and knock you out of the wall. This just makes boss runs incredibly tedious. Enemies in this game are also very relentless. They have an incredibly wide aggro range, and once you do aggro them, they will chase you to the corners of the earth until they kill you. They will not give up. What? To me, I just view that as being a fake difficulty modifier to increase the longevity of the game. Most of the bosses in this game are pushovers, so they have incredibly difficult runs to get there. But what really frustrates me about doing these boss runs is getting staggered out of a fog wall. Now I know I could stay and kill all the enemies, so this would not happen to me. But when you're dealing with a challenging boss, you want to get right back in there between every death. I don't want to be wasting 10-15 minutes killing all the mobs before I can go in there. When the rhythm is going good with a boss, you want to get back in there ASAP and work on what you just failed at. In my opinion, the absolute worst example of this is the boss run to Sir Alone. And if there is anyone out there that kills every mob between every death to that boss, then I would firmly shake your hand. You are an absolute madman. Another honourable mention just goes to switches and chests and doors in general. When you have no iframes during the startup of the animation for a few seconds, and then you get staggered and killed while opening a door, chest or switch. Sure, it's more realistic, but this is a game that has talking cats. Realism isn't always a good thing in video games. And speaking of boss fights, let's talk about the big dudes in big armor complaint that a lot of people have. Now personally, my favorite kind of boss fights are 1v1 fights against humanoids or giant dudes in armor. There's something familiar about these kind of fights, and it feels like you're on level peggings with your opponent. And it's not a weird animal creature thing that has loads of legs and incredibly weird hitboxes. And I don't think the problem that most people have is that it's a giant dudes in armor. I think the problem is they are underwhelming giant dudes in armor. Guys like the Mirror Knight or Felstad are not bad bosses, but there's nothing particularly exciting or memorable about them, besides maybe the Mirror Knight summoning guys from his shield. Whoa, wow, Mirror Knight, you're like a late game boss and you're still using his shield. Have you not heard of player conditioning, you fucking scrub? Again, they're not bad bosses, but I don't think I have ever died to guys like the Mirror Knight or Dragon Riders, Twin Dragon Riders, or Velstad. And I don't mean that to be cocky, it's just that they are also kind of mechanically similar and they all fight at a similar pace, so if you can beat one of them by circle strafing and smacking them on the ass, then you can probably beat all of them by using the same tactic. And I think that's why most people really like the Fume Knight. He just mixes up his timing so well with light and heavy attacks, slow attacks, really fast attacks, and it's unpredictable. That's what I liked about Fume Knight. I think that's what most people like. It's unpredictable. And I don't really want to make the comparison to Dark Souls 3 because it wasn't out at the time, so we knew no different, but it really is a great example of good one-on-one boss fights against dudes in armor. Guys like Soul of Cinder, Champion Gundyr, the Dancer Pontiff Sullivan, the Twin Princess, these are all very aggressive and very unpredictable bosses. But overall in this game I find it very hard to pick a favourite boss fight. A lot of them are just very underwhelming and uninspired designs. Now I don't think a lot of the bosses are bad because they are mechanically broken or anything frustrating like that. They're all pretty straightforward fights, and I think that's the problem. They're not mechanically different or challenging. The most common reaction I got from a lot of the fights was, you know, was that it? Was that actually a boss fight? The 4 boss fights for the 4 Great Souls and the final boss fight of the game, and so many fights in between that even, they're okay. There's nothing really challenging about them. Getting to the boss fight is nearly always harder than actually doing these fights. So now let's talk about level design, lore, and some other details about the game. I'm not going to harp on about the level design too much because everyone already knows it's not interconnected like Dark Souls 1. There is a lot of dumb shit like the elevator from Earthen Peak to Iron Keep. There's just a lot of inconsistencies in the world. But given that Dark Souls 2 had a very troubled development cycle and it was scrapped like midway through and they rebuilt it again, From Software really has to be commended for the number of areas that they put in and just the sheer size of this game. It is pretty big, there's lots to explore. And I can live with the fact that it's not interconnected. I can live with the fact that some areas, how they connect to other areas, just make absolutely no sense whatsoever. It does break the immersive experience that Dark Souls is known for, and it kind of makes you question it, like this is dumb, but it's still playable, and that's the main thing, I guess. But what my main problem with the environments and areas is that they are just lacking that kind of Dark Souls touch, that level of detail that Dark Souls 1 has, Bloodborne has, Dark Souls 3 has. There are so many rooms in Dark Souls 2 that are just 4 grey walls, a ceiling and a floor. There's like nothing in them to suggest that what the hell this room is. They're just bare, they're blank, there's nothing here. Also, there are way too many bonfires in the levels, and I don't even think I need to speak on that further. I think the majority of people agree. Way too many bonfires. And again, I don't think I need to talk much about life gems. The majority of people probably agree that life gems removed a lot of tension in Dark Souls 2. As for the lore in Dark Souls 2, I think it is deep and rich, but it's also easy to just not care about it. But I think out of most points that I have made so far, that lore is the most subjective. There's no good or bad, it's just up to individual interpretation. The lore and events of Dark Souls 2 were really distanced from what happened in Dark Souls 1, and personally I just was not ready for such a departure yet. And although I am very open to seeing new stories and events unravel in different ages and eras within this universe, I think it was just a bit too soon. I don't think people were ready to just let go of one story just yet. As for combat in the game, it's kind of floaty and weird, you know, using a sword and hitting someone, it just doesn't have any weight to it. It doesn't even feel like you're connecting. It feels like you're hitting some kind of invisible wall in front of the enemies. Again, that's not a huge problem that makes this an inherently bad game. It might even be a personal preference thing, but it does kind of break the immersion of armed melee combat. Also, I'm not sure why they changed the animations for parrying and backstabs. That might be nitpicky of me, that I don't really like them, but especially the backstab, it's never quite clear when I'm landing a backstab because the startup animation looks just like a regular R1 attack, so I'm like, did I land it or not? PvP for me is just, it's fine. I'm a very basic style player when it comes to PvP. I'm either two-handing a sword or I'm carrying a parrying shield with me. That's all I need, and Dark Souls 2 delivers. Oh, I love invasions. Oh! Soul Memory was a huge mistake, and restricting invincibility frames to a stat that you level up was also a huge mistake. And last but not least, and what probably most of you were expecting to see crop up in this video, Dark Souls 2 is not conditioning you to drop shields. Not at all. If anything, it's encouraging to use shields. If Dark Souls 2 was conditioning players not to use shields, then they would not have added 74 shields to the game, almost double that of what Dark Souls 1 has. Roll dodging is terrible in this game unless you know that you have to level up the adaptability stat, and even at that, roll dodging costs a lot of stamina. And if you are a player that uses shields, please do not feel discouraged that you are playing the game wrong or you are bad at the game. You are doing absolutely nothing wrong. If anything, you are probably playing the game as intended, because shields are very viable in this game because rolling does tend to be shitty at times. My final conclusion is this: Dark Souls 2 is a very good game. It is, in my opinion, the weakest of the trilogy and the most frustrating out of the trilogy, but honestly it probably would not be half as frustrating if aggro levels were just turned down a notch and if they just removed the Iron Keep from the game. Seriously, fuck the Iron Keep.